He's been in Question Time. Once or twice, apparently.
Welcome back to the Angry Scotland podcast. This week, you, the listeners, have tasked us with the verbal annihilation of one Mr. Nigel Farage.
He just seemed to me to be a sort of acceptable home county's face of middle-class racism. Nothing I've seen since has dissuaded me from that. But I am intrigued by the arc, because what he says he believes in and what he actually does are very, very, very different things. So it's worth looking at the history of UKIP. UKIP was originally founded in 1991 by a liberal economics professor, probably more libertarian, shall we say, but he describes himself as a classic liberal, called Alan Sked. And it was originally the Anti-Federalist League, which was a Eurosceptic party. And then in 1993, they sort of renamed themselves as the UK Independence Party, which gave them a sort of snappy title of UKIP. And that was around the time that Farage came in. Farage presents himself as like a founder member of UKIP. That's not strictly true. He came in a couple of years later and then started changing the direction of it. And then 4 years later, they kicked out the founder and started to take a hard right bent. It seems that Nigel Farage has links to the National Front, and Alan Sked has brought this up himself, saying Nigel Farage has used racist language to him, saying the nignogs won't vote for us anyway, so don't worry about that. And Sked was absolutely horrified by that. And Farage has had a former National Front activist as his campaign manager in Thanet. So it was entryism. If you think about how difficult it would be for him to have risen in the Conservative Party, it would have been very, very difficult. He would have just been some sort of backbencher of the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who nobody'd heard of for years and years and years. But by sort of taking over a kind of small outfit like that, he can be a very, very big fish in a small pool and get a lot of noise.
So where does he come from prior to that?
Private school boy, dad's a stockbroker. Dad appears to have been a bit of an alcoholic twat, from what I can tell. So I think Farage is actually maybe the product of a broken home, or at least a not very sound one. Becomes a stockbroker and is a member of the Conservative Party. Apparently votes Green in 1989, so he says, because they had Eurosceptic policies. I find myself thinking that the Green Party has had a very, very lucky escape. Considering what he subsequently did to UKIP. He leaves the Conservative Party in 1992 and essentially gets into bed with what becomes UKIP in 1993.
Is he a true believer, or is he just doing this as a career? Is this something he's worked out that he can carve out a money-making gimmick, I guess, for himself? Or did he really say, no, I must save the planet in Nigel's brain by becoming Nigel Farage and doing what he did with UKIP, causing Brexit? Does he mean these things, or is he just doing them because it gets him a payday?
That is to make a window into a man's soul, and I'm not sure that I can answer that. I think he probably did genuinely believe in it to begin with. I'm sure along the way, it's been 22 years since he ousted the liberal economics professor. So it's been 22 years. In that time, a great deal has happened and he has become very, very rich. So whether or not he still believes things in probably the quite simplistic way he did then, or whether or not this is now just his payday, that's another one of those cups of coffee that you can't unstir.
Yeah. I mean, he is a politician, right? So they're all the same, really, in that regard, that they say stuff that they don't believe.
Yeah.
But I think with him, the difference is that he's extremely good at that, better than probably anyone else. That is his amazing skill of just taking sort of ideas that he might believe and then portraying it in a certain way that's very approachable and not as mental as it might actually be under the surface.
I have to confess, and I should put this on record, I think it's important for truth and honesty in the podcast. I remember distinctly the first time I saw him was on a YouTube video, and it would have been one of these video edits they do. To this day, the far right still do this. Wherever they make a speech or they're doing an interview on the BBC, they cut out anything that will make them look bad. So you get this impression that this person talking is a god and has all the answers. And I watched him talk to the European Parliament, and I will immediately stress, in this particular conversation, he never brought up immigration, no race issues. This was, I think, around the time of the Greece situation, and it was very economics driven. He was banging on, as he does, about unelected bureaucrats and the relationship they had with the European Central Bank and yada, yada, yada. And I have to confess, on that first viewing, one, I immediately thought this guy can really talk. Almost to the point where it's too polished, which is kind of the giveaway once you start paying attention, because he's so articulate, the hand movements, everything, they're just perfect all the time, and he's got a very set way of how he talks, his cadence, it's very rehearsed. But when you first hear that, it's quite compelling. And what he was saying in that speech, I was kind of drawn in by it a little bit, because this is probably 2010, maybe 2009. So around this time period, I'm politically very uneducated, still am, but back then particularly. And my entry into politics, I guess, was from a slightly more libertarian angle. So that was pushing all my buttons with that speech that he gave. It's only when you start paying attention, and very quickly, a few speeches later, I realised he was a fucking idiot and a racist. But initially, though, I was kind of taken in, and I guess it probably does show why so many people may have tumbled into that, perhaps by mistake. But the key thing is uneducated. Like, I was thick. That's what he got me. I was dumb.
I think it sounds like your experience of that is very much like mine of Boris, where, the first time I see him, he's speaking about something I am very passionate about, and he's taking my side and he's speaking very eloquently about it. And I think, oh, this is quite interesting. Then I hear him saying something that's essentially 180 degrees different. The next time I hear him say something, oh, right, you're one of those. With Farage, he just drifted into my consciousness over a period of years. So, I became politically active after 9/11 because I was absolutely horrified by what was going on with the Iraq war and stuff like that. And I saw him seeping into the media, and I was very conscious of this neoconservative reaction, and I saw him as actually being one of the faces of that.
The Blair years are basically when I realised, whoa, something is very, very wrong.
Yeah.
The Iraq war is the big one. The weapons of mass destruction lie. So one thing I think is important to note is that Farage was not for the Iraq war. And to come back to the libertarian thing, there was kind of two reactions, I think, to the Iraq situation or the kind of Bush administration, the aftermath of that. You either went very lefty with it, the government's good, but this is bad government. Or you went the road that I did, which was all the establishment is awful, bring it down. I'm a teenager, of course you're going to think like that. As you get older, you mature.
Still think like that. Yeah. All right.
And I'm not entirely convinced that to a certain extent, I don't still think like that, but I am aware now that you cannot just burn everything down. This is where, jumping to the likes of Julian Assange, when WikiLeaks first popped its head up, I was quite happy to see the world burn. Now, 13 years on, I look at that and I'm slightly embarrassed by how keen I was. I understand that in the middle of all the stuff that was going on with Bush and Cheney and all the rest of it, to see these secrets revealed seemed really, really important. However, I'm now of the opinion that was always a Russian outlet from the beginning, and that I was a sucker. And I really, really hate being a sucker.
But I think that's what a lot of us went through in that time period, because a lot of things are happening at once. The broadband internet is hitting in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
So you've got this actual real world on the news every night presentation of the establishment lying. And we know this is bullshit. So this is not a conspiracy theory. We know what happened with Iraq. So you have that. And then at the same time, YouTube is arriving on the scene for the very first time.
Yeah.
So suddenly the aforementioned video edits by the far right, they're starting to come in. Alex Jones is now turning up on the spot.
Yep.
All the 9/11 conspiracy documentaries are arriving. And especially if you're my age, you're a teenager, you're not too savvy at this point, you're like, oh my God, I can't trust anybody. Like, you're taken in by that. And Farage, as you say, is almost like dripped into the middle of all that. And I think people have said this before with him. It's like he poisons the water. And I think that is the best analogy for him. It's not like an overnight thing. It's just a little drip. And then slowly, he just became this entity, coming from a very anti-Tony Blair thing. I think that's maybe the point I'm trying to make here, that the EU wasn't really in the discussion at that time period, but that was the next step.
Yeah.
So it was like, create distrust in the establishment, and then we'll get the racism stuff.
Yeah, the Tory party has been essentially two warring factions over Europe forever. So Farage allegedly says that John Major and the Maastricht Treaty was what finally made him quit the Conservative Party, and that's when he went over to UKIP, as it became. So 97, Farage becomes leader, I think, of UKIP, and certainly Skeld is ousted. 1999, Putin takes over. Then we have the sort of Iraq War, 9/11, all of that turmoil. Then in 2005, RT International starts broadcasting. From what I can tell, based on something I read in a Guardian article, so if this is wrong, I apologise, but it seems that he started appearing on RT in 2010. That's the first time they paid any attention to him. And then he was on a lot.
Alex Jones, a lot of the what we now refer to as the alt-right, RT were the first major television outlet to give them a spot. These guys were internet-centric people until RT came.
And so what then happens is apparently Nigel Farage, because he's a party leader, he gets what they call a plenary speech in the Parliament once a month. And he will go in and I'll quite often give a speech that's absolutely nothing to do with whatever is actually being debated. And then he leaves again afterwards and he doesn't stay for the rest of the debate. So he just comes in, he gives this speech, we fill a load of sound bites. Now, Carol Cadwalader of The Guardian had sort of said that she thought that RT in particular was gaming this. The Washington Post has looked at that and they said it's not just RT. There's a number of other alt-right outlets like Breitbart and other things. And they will then, using their algorithms, they will boost Farage's online presence on YouTube so that he is appearing. So, and they'll do it by making it the next video up after some clickbait about weather or cats or some shit like that.
Yeah. Well, this is how I think I encountered him. And as you're describing there, the video you're seeing of said speech is completely out of context. The speaker that has just made a statement has sat down. The beginning of the video is Farage will stand up and then we'll give it the, Mr. Speaker, this is ridiculous. And you'll go into the rant. And it may have nothing to do with what the other guys just said. And I have no way to know that because that's out of the video. It's cut.
Yeah.
You know, so suddenly he can start saying things about this corrupt relationship you have with the European Central Bank. And you're unelected. This is disgusting. And if you don't know any better, you're sat there going like, yeah, this guy's fucking taking it to the establishment. Come back to the timeline on this. This is on the back of Iraq. This is on the back of Blair. So there's a lot of people like me that are out there going, yeah, fuck the establishment. Bring it down. So when you hear that initially, until, again, you look at it more closely, your initial reaction is like, yeah, he's one of us. He's taking them on. And then, of course, you do like 2 seconds of research and you go, oh, wait, no, he's not. But not a lot of people do that.
No.
We're the kind of people, we don't trust anybody. So the second someone turns up, we're like, let's wait a minute here.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people are just like, oh, fuck yeah, they're on our side. Like Joe Swinson right now, we're in like 2019. Basically, the Lib Dems have just jumped on the Joe Swinson bandwagon, not knowing who she is, not really knowing her background, where she comes from, her history, anything like that. But because, she's anti-Brexit, so therefore she's one of us. And it's the same thing with Farage to a degree, because if you look at that speech that happens in isolation, oh yeah, he's against corrupt bankers. I'm against corrupt bankers. We're on the same team. And it's really like later.
Broker. He is a corrupt banker.
Exactly. And and thankfully me and you and I'm assuming Free was the same way, that like we worked him out fairly fast. Like I never lingered on that, but my initial impression was not one of, oh fuck this guy. It was like, oh, he's interesting. I also remember distinctly, I went to a Young Scots for Independence meeting way back, I think in possibly 2012. Was subsequently kicked out of the Young Scots for Independence. but at the time, I remember one of the guys that was in the group, or someone that came to talk to us, be like, Nigel Farage is like, fuck, he's a joke. Like, he'll never be a thing. Like, completely dismissing him. And I remember at the time going like, maybe in Scotland, okay, we can kind of make that point, but this guy's gonna be a fucking problem because he can talk. He is a dick. He's a fucking arsehole. But to sort of discount him completely in the talents or skill set that he has is a mistake. Anybody that saw him talking in 2010 and saw what these videos were about should have been able to go, if he gets an outlet, if he's allowed on the BBC, this guy's going to be a serious fucking problem. So the way he was just dismissed as a joke by so many people, and then that joke then became, oh, we'll bring the joke on the TV. He's only a joke. What can you do? And now where do we end up?
Yeah.
And that may be the next bit we go on and talk about, is him getting that break.
Well, the BBC have certainly been instrumental in making that phenomenon, because they just kept inviting him on, and they gave him a parity with other politicians, which created a public impression that UKIP were much bigger than they were. UKIP have only ever been electorally successful in the European elections. That's basically the only time they've been successful, when the turnout for European elections is basically the lowest, I believe. I think it's lower than council elections, because let's face it, only nerds give a fuck. Right? I mean, I always vote in the EU elections, but I'm a nerd.
It's sort of like a great advert for the EU, though, is it?
Sorry, guys, but it's true.
The movement of dorks.
No one actually cares.
Well, only in this country, because again,
Yeah,
in any other European nations, we actually get news coverage. You get news coverage of the EU. It's just that in Britain, and particularly in Scotland, we just get the local Scottish news, and then we get Westminster, and it's like nothing exists. You know,
coverage
elsewhere.
has basically consisted of Boris Johnson telling lies about prawn cocktail crisps and bananas. So people haven't been interested, and they haven't understood what it actually represented.
To put it in the context of the post-Iraq war, disinformation campaign that's going on, it's like the disinformation campaign's off the back of something that was obviously bullshit. So there's a nugget of truth there, but then it flies off. But I think that's something that, if you think about the psychology of the nation, if I'm thinking the establishment is corrupt, why wouldn't I think the EU is corrupt? Like, until I educate myself otherwise. So if you're going like, look how fucking corrupt Westminster is, I'm going like, yes, it is, it's very corrupt. And then some guy goes, and imagine that, but it's bigger and in Europe. And I'm like, well, fucking, that's terrible, my God. Like, of course you're going to believe that until you actually stop and think and go like, maybe I should research this rather than just listening to this guy. So, you know.
I think all politics is corrupt, and there's a limit to what you can do about that, but you best limit that by having really, really good, strong constitutions and laws.
I think Farage has been good at this, finding things that are bad about the EU and then really hammering on them. Like, for example,
endlessly.
He was quite big in against Barroso, and there was like kind of a scandal where Barroso had went on holiday for a couple of weeks on this Greek shipping magnate's yacht.
Yeah.
And then, like, subsequently, a few months down the line, they get bailed out by the EU for like hundreds of millions of euros. So things like that, you think, well, that's a completely legitimate thing, and he's kind of leading these things, and it's boosting his profile, and he's just doing something that's kind of, most people would say is actually good. And that's where he's been very clever. He's taken these kind of fights that every day kind of person in the street would go, oh yeah, he's in my side.
But what are his motivations for that? And, I would say that his motivations initially were probably pure, in as much as a racist motives are purely racist. Because he genuinely is a little Englander.
I think he is a man that I genuinely believe is not that smart. My feeling on Nigel is that he's not that clever, and he wants the world to be more simple than it actually is. I think he's one of these characters that he can actually accept. We live in this very complicated shades of grey world that you really have to pay attention to, you have to research, you have to engage with, you can't run away from it. Whereas I think he's taken the coward's road, which is basically to go, oh, I'm not as clever as someone else, and oh, I don't like how complicated things are. Just build a wall and kick out everyone that looks different from me, and I want everyone to be the same. And that's what he is, I think, deep down at his core. And I think it's just he's found an audience for that.
Alan
Stead,
the original founder of UKIP, described him as a racist dimwit. And that was based on, he said...
To be fair, though, he is going to say that because he's the guy that his job's stolen off.
But, I mean, he fucking hates him, that much is clear.
Well, allegedly in his school days as well, Farage, like, there was people who were saying, some of the teachers said, oh, this guy shouldn't become like a prefect or whatever.
Yeah, because he was
racist. He's involved in these racist people.
Because you kind of get the impression, psychology-wise, that at a very young age, You could see him in the playground, being the thick kid maybe, like he's not the smartest in the class, definitely not the most athletic, certainly not the best looking, but he realises if I make a racist joke, I get a reaction. And you could see how that seed is then planted, and like that's how he's going to stand out. That's going to make me different. That's going to make me something.
The hilarious thing is that he, when asked about this, he said, I was being accused of being involved with the far right just because I liked Enoch Powell. Nige.
What? And I'm just like, why would anyone think I was a Nazi just because I think Hitler's okay?
I mean, where do you begin?
I just like the Nazis' clothes.
Yeah, the coolest uniforms. But I mean, the thing that I think we do want to make a distinction here is that Blair, who we've brought up on the podcast many times, but I've always said that Blair is incredibly intelligent. The one thing I've never said is that he's stupid, and I said this about Thatcher as well. Like, Thatcher was a very evil woman, but she was clever. I've never called Blair a fucking idiot in my life because I think he's dangerous because he's intelligent. But when it comes to the likes of Farage, and I'd also say the same about Boris, to be honest, out with his memory of 18th century quotes and so forth, I don't think actually at his core he has a natural kind of intelligence, a questioning intelligence.
Yeah.
These are guys that just want everything to be simple.
They also want it to be the way it was 40 years ago.
Under the delusion that it was simpler back then when it wasn't.
No.
Because this nostalgia that Farage taps into with the boomer generation particularly is nostalgia for an age that never existed. This idea that it was better back in the day is categorically horseshit. And actually, if you really put someone on the spot and said to them, can you name me something that the EU has done to you personally that has really affronted you? Like, I reckon a lot of people that voted to leave would really struggle to actually articulate it.
The James O'Brien show would appear to back you up because that's basically it all the time. So what law is it that you don't want to have to obey anymore? And no one can... I mean, why does at least no one lock up one before they phone in? But no one ever does. They're fucking imbeciles. They all just flock to online radio slaughter to just phone up and say, we're taking back control of what?
And it is just racism. It's just this idea that, well, things were better back in the day because there were less coloured people, which is fucking horrific. But that, I genuinely believe, is what Farage is subconsciously or consciously tapping into.
It's the coming over here. It's Schrodinger's immigrant, isn't it? Both taking our jobs and sucking up all the benefits.
Can't speak English, but they took my job.
Yeah, maybe your job wasn't that hard.
That's the other classic one, which is the job that's now obsolete that you lost. So it's like something that's completely redundant now. It's like, well, I used to manufacture VHS tapes, so I want my job back. Whereas the other person that's got off the boat, that's made the effort to adjust, because if you got on the boat to begin with, you're willing to adjust and adapt, that's part of your character, they're going to find out what the next thing is and go and get that job. Meanwhile, you're still pining because they don't make sense anymore. That's all I wanted to do with my life. These people should blame themselves before they start blaming anybody else.
The blaming of immigrants for the lack of resources locally is an understandable reaction for people who see their own. It's wrong. It's understandable that if you can't get a fucking GP's appointment for a week and a half, even on an emergency, do you know what I mean? And you're ending up having to go to A&E when you need antibiotics or some shit like that, which is the sort of shit that's happening down in England. And you see lots and lots of foreigners coming into your area, you probably are going to think to yourself, I can't get a place at the local school, or I can't do this, that, and the other, or I can't get a GP appointment. And it's because of these people swarming in, this idea, which is horrific. But what's actually happened there is that there hasn't been an appropriate allocation of resources and money to an area. And that is actually a political decision coming down from way, way, way up the tree.
I mean, it's not worth talking about this idea that the Tories deflect what really should be put on them onto the other. So, as you say there, there's not enough people at this GP's office to serve me. Is the issue then not get a bigger GP's office, fund this, hire more staff.
Yes.
That would be the rational solution, whereas the Tories, because they don't want you to think like that, are going like, oh no, it's because there's too many brown people in it. That's the real issue.
Or Polish people.
Or whatever.
Or
like,
Latvian people. Or...
Yeah, so that's probably why...
Not Australians, though. They're all right, because they're sort of us, aren't they?
Yeah, they're quite similar. Not the fucking Irish, though.
Of course, the irony is that if it wasn't for immigrants working in the NHS, the problem would be far, far worse.
Yeah.
As we're already seeing, because so many of them are already going, fuck this for a game of soldiers.
But I mean, that's probably why Farage and the alt-right have done so well under the Tories, because that is, whether David Cameron would want to admit it, that's got to be encouraged from above. I refuse to accept this notion that Cameron is trying to put out there that he got blindsided by all of this. No, dude, you fucking knew. You were the Prime Minister during the height of austerity. Don't tell me that that wasn't a talked about strategy at some stage where just blame it on immigration. You got Theresa May out there with the fucking vans. He's in charge when all that shit's happening.
I think Cameron was a very, very weak Prime Minister. I think David Cameron is actually a kind of George Bush type character, whereby he's somebody that ended up in power purely because of birthright and status and class and stuff, whereas I don't think he really had any interest in it. I mean, for God's sake, he used to be a TV producer, did he not? You know, I mean,
I never knew that. We've never done an episode of Cameron before. I had no idea he used to produce TV.
We will Google this, but I believe he used to work for Good Morning Britain or something. I need to check that. I've not made that up in a bad dream.
I thought it was Esther McVeigh.
Oh Christ, maybe I've just merged one horror show into another. She certainly used to be a journalist.
There's no way David Cameron could produce television. Like, a TV producer, that's actually quite an important job with quite a lot of responsibility and skill involved in it. There's no fucking way. I mean, that you can be a Prime Minister if you're thick as shit, but like, there's no way.
Have a look at
that will shock me. And if he was, I need to know what shows he worked on.
We'll look that up in a bit.
Okay.
But David Cameron is not somebody that is a true blue, dyed-in-the-wool Tory heartlands activist. He's just somebody that's been brought up Tory. If he'd have been brought up in a different environment, his politics would have been something else.
Like an ideologue, he's just like a bureaucrat. He's like falling into a job.
Well, it's the sort of thing a chap like him does, isn't it? Become Prime Minister. George Osborne was the ideologue behind austerity.
I am fucking fascinated by George Osborne. He's right up there. He's twinned with Tony Blair as somebody that I just think is a next level psychopath. I mean, there's something about that guy. I've never seen someone so emotionless and robotic. The fact that he actually procreated is mind-blowing to me. Like, the fact that guy actually has children. I think the wife has left him. But I mean, the way he could just do TV interviews and talk about austerity, almost like a Terminator, like just sat there, just going like, yeah, got all this money for public services. Lots of people are going to die. Does it bother me? Not in the slightest. So yeah, George Osborne is a really, really dangerous guy. That, as you say, I reckon was the driving force behind a lot of the worst of the Cameron years. Kind of the Dick Cheney, I guess, to...
very much so. The person that was actually pulling the strings.
Yeah.
I've made that up. David Cameron is a political researcher.
I told you there's no way he could produce television.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I got that from. I think he had some involvement with TV, I thought, because he struck me as the kind of plastic-faced.
I could see him hosting TV. I mean, without weird about it. Let's give the devil his due. I could see.
But yeah, he
does TV.
He was a political researcher, so actually, he's one of these people that just went straight from sort of school, university, straight into being a kind of spad.
Yeah, George Osborne very much the Dick Cheney, but David Cameron is the George Bush in this example, I think.
I think so. Somebody who was naive about the people around him to a certain extent. And to me, it's quite interesting, again, when you look at the kind of timeline of where British politics are with the output of Russia Today. And I think Russia Today is really, really worth focusing on, especially as we're focusing on Nigel Farage. 2010, we have the Tories and the Liberal Party in coalition in government. And at this point, that means that the election promise to have a referendum on the EU isn't going to happen because it's binned because the Liberal Democrats won't wash it. So it's kicked down the road. In 2010, Nigel Farage starts getting slots on Russia Today. In 2014, we have the Scottish independence referendum where the BBC really overplays its hand and is seen very, very negatively in Scotland. In October 2014, 1 month after the independence referendum, RT UK, as a dedicated channel, opens its doors instead of us just getting RT International. The next year, we have another general election where we are expecting there to be a hung parliament again and Liberal Democrats balance of power, except everybody gives the Liberal Democrats a sound thrashing for having gone into bed with the Tories, and the Tories scrape by that tiny majority, which means we now have a Brexit referendum. And WikiLeaks then opens its doors in 2006. We have had a 14 to 15 year influence campaign by Russia in UK politics to push us towards this in order to be a splinter. And they're doing it in other countries as well.
I think it's a two-pronged thing, and because that is right. Everything you said is correct, but it is very conspiratorial sounding. But I think to put that into a real-world context, that you explain how that occurs, this stuff gets ratings. Loose Change was the very famous 9/11 conspiracy documentary.
Yeah.
But that sold like hotcakes. I mean, that was the biggest thing on the internet. And I think at the height of it, in I think 2005 was my memory of when that really, really hit. It spiked up to 70% of Americans were legitimately thought Bush did 9/11, like as a result of this documentary. So you can understand how TV producers are sat there going, there's an audience for this. And of course, if you're then in the Kremlin going, oh, wait a minute, we can weaponize this. And it's the two things coming together. So again, it's a political driven thing on one hand, but on the other hand, it's just bullshit human weakness and selfishness. So a lot of these TV people that will give people like Farage a platform or Steve Bannon, put him on Good Morning Britain, I don't necessarily think they're doing it out of conscious evil, but they are very complicit in the evil nonetheless.
I think Putin has had a game plan because Russia's really poor. They've got the resource curse thing going on, whereby they've got loads of oil and gas, but all of that has done is led them into a position where their leadership and the oligarchs are draining the country dry, and ordinary people are poor and sick. And the only way that Russia can actually keep its status to a certain extent and keep its strength is by undermining other players around them. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to undermine democracy. They're trying to break up the EU because it's this great big bloc that's directly next to them, trying to undermine America. Similarly, because these are threats to them and they haven't got the resources to challenge them head on in a military fashion, nor do they want, they don't want to have to. But what they can do is essentially corrode them. Also, I'm just going to come back and say, I fucking knew that David Cameron had worked in TV. He was a special advisor to Carlton in 1994. After he was a SPAD, he went on to work for Carlton, and then he left them in 97. I fucking knew he'd worked for ITV.
You're totally right about all these things that Russia try to do to try and destabilise things across the world, but I'm pretty sceptical about like how successful they actually are. I think, to me, it feels more like they're piggybacking on something that kind of already exists in a lot of ways, and it's something we're doing to ourselves.
Where they see a weakness, they fill it with water and then freeze and thaw.
Yeah, I think they plant seeds. I think that my thinking on it is, and I think there is evidence to back this up in terms of their, hacking the election in America. Like, I don't think they hacked an election. All they did was take out some Facebook adverts. So they plant this idea that Hillary Clinton is Satan. You wouldn't vote for the devil, would you? Here's Hillary boxing with Jesus. Who are you going to vote for? And that's all it takes.
I think
then America does the rest.
I think what they are successful in is like giving a platform to people who are not quite there yet, and they have a good chance to practice their skills I think that was true for like Farage. He's getting all these TV slots and being able to get interviewed over and over and over again. So when it came to the point he was doing like Question Time, he was such a practiced performer by that point.
Yeah,
I don't think anyone was hardly anyone was actually watching him on RT.
They amplify weak
Totally
signals, and so I mean, this is where I find the influence of RT really pernicious. As for instance, in Scottish politics, I can remember in 2014, I was starting to watch RT because it felt like the only place where you'd see an indie rally reported on or anything like that. And that's literally how they get you. So for a lot of people, they're then cancelling their TV licenses and stopping watching the BBC, and they're starting to watch RT instead. But then RT is sneaking in all the stuff about, like the White Helmets being a terrorist organisation and a load of other stuff.
Again, that sounds quite conspiratorial, but
we
off the yeah, it's exactly. But off the podcast, we have actually had conversations going like, I don't remember the independence movement being this batshit nuts in 2014. Like a lot of people that used to follow the Angry account and followed all of us, I think back then, have really just gone fucking full zoomer since then. And you wonder, like, what the fuck happened? Like, these people seemed relatively sane. I mean, there's certain ones amongst them that were never sane and were always fucking terrible. Let's make that very fucking clear. But there were other people that were kind of more like soft politics wise. They were, I'm yes, and that's really what I'm here to do. And I'm not going to get involved in all that mad shit. And then now are right in there with the RT narrative. Yeah. So the minute, the Sergei Skripal thing comes up, they start coming out with all the crazy conspiracy theories about it, which is all being driven by RT.
Yeah.
And, Salmond Show is now on there incredibly. I mean, the only guy charged with attempted rape that still has a TV show on the planet, I would imagine at this point. But, there we go. I think I can say that without cutting it.
Say people are saying at the beginning it's all fine.
Allegedly, people, I have heard a rumour that the former First Minister of the country has been charged with attempted rape. Purely a rumour.
People are charged.
That's what I'm saying. So I think, I can fucking say that. He's been charged with attempted rape and multiple accounts of sexual assault and still has an outlet on that channel. And I guess with that case, it's almost the inverse of what you're talking about with Farage, where typically RT's the kind of the grooming ground for when you're on your way up, whereas I guess they've also got the back end of it when you're on your way down. But I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense because, I say, the Scottish independence movement, I think, serves as a very isolated but clear example of people tiptoeing into a world of madness, and it's so slow you don't realise that you're going that way. So as you say there, all right, RT, they're showing a Scottish independence march, I'll watch this. And then 2 years down the line, you're hardwired in to utter conspiratorial madness by that point, and you don't realise it's happened.
No, of course not. Much the same way that people are watching Fox News in America. It needs to be understood that there are core connecting points between the likes of RT and Breitbart and Fox News. And actually, coming back to our core subject, Nigel Farage and WikiLeaks, Nigel Farage is right at the centre of all of that. The Mueller investigation, I was absolutely fascinated by Nigel Farage because he just kept fucking coming up in so many different ways. The current scandal that's caused the Democrats to actually fucking find their fucking balls and impeach the bastard is Ukraine. Because, of course, the annexation of Crimea was what caused sanctions against Russia, which meant that their deal with Exxon to export oil couldn't go ahead. In 2016, roughly the same sort of time that we've got the Brexit referendum happening here, Paul Manafort becomes campaign manager for Donald Trump. Paul Manafort used to work as basically a campaign manager for the Ukrainian president, and he remade this guy. This guy was a mobster thug. He basically fucking sorted out the hair, sorted out the suit, told him what to say, shoved him in front of the camera, and he raked off millions. Something fucked up, and he ended up owing an oligarch millions of pounds. He was skint and owing, an internationally dangerous criminal, allegedly Russian mob boss oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, millions of pounds, millions of dollars, goes to work for Trump for free as campaign manager in June 2016. And one of the first things that he does is change the GOP's policy position. In fact, it's the only thing that the Trump campaign asked for as a change to the GOP policy positions in the conference that year, was a change on policy towards Ukraine, whereby they were no longer going to be seeking to sanction Russia over the annexation of Crimea. That was the only thing they asked for. Subsequent to that, a couple of months on, Manafort has to essentially be let go from the campaign when there is an unearthing of an archive of documents in Ukraine indicating that he'd been paid off book millions of pounds by the Ukrainian government, and the scandal, and he's quietly let go. He's, of course, now being prosecuted for tax evasion and all the rest of it. So Ukraine and Russia has been at the heart of this from the very beginning. Now, into that, you've got Steve Bannon comes along. He's running Breitbart. Breitbart in London is run by one of the sort of co-conveners of UKIP, Raheem Kassan. So he's running Breitbart in London. So you've got Farage, Breitbart, Bannon, Trump. It's been Russia for the last 6-7 years, perhaps, essentially running UKIP.
But what comes out of that for me is that and
Aaron Banks, of course.
The kind of alt-right, the elements there, we're not talking about true believers here. We're talking about political pawns.
Yeah.
And this is to come right back to a question I asked at the start. Is he a true believer or not? My instinct is that he isn't. I think
not anymore.
To play a pro wrestling term in this, I think this is a work. This isn't a shoot. A shoot is when something is real. A work is when something is fake.
Okay.
So I think that there's a chance possibly that he has worked himself into a shoot, in the sense that what has started off as a kind of money-making, careerist, opportunistic exercise to get on TV, make a bit of a name for himself, take an easy paycheck off the EU for years while bashing them. Hey, I say some racist stuff at the playground. The kids love that. Fuck, I can make a career doing this, right? It starts off as, I don't really believe in what I'm saying, but, it's getting a reaction. And then the next minute, you're involved with the scenario you just mapped out there. So you've basically your criminality occurring with Ukraine. So their leaders are effectively saying that if I can get an insider into the White House, we can make this policy shift and all our problems can just kind of go away. That then grows arms and legs, and you've got guys that are really just doing it for the attention and the money, are now wrapped into this actually very real criminal conspiracy, and they now can't really back out of it.
So I would say that I think Farage probably genuinely does hate the EU, because I think the idea of free movement of people is antithetical to him. I think he is a proper, just old-fashioned, uses the term nig-nogs racist. That's a direct report from somebody that, has a beef with him, but because of this sort of behaviour. And I think the takeover of UKIP was National Front entryism into slightly better looking politics. And then I think down the line from that, the money has started to pour in. It's now, he's a 22-year-old vintage politician who's still going on about career politicians.
Dude, you are the establishment.
You are a stockbroker that ran a campaign out of somebody's spare grain barn who wears fucking tweed suits.
That says it all right there.
Red trousers.
Aye. And
you're railing against the establishment. Mate, I hate to fucking break it to you, but ...
What is interesting about all this is the comparisons with InfoWars and Alex Jones. And I think Farage and him have got a lot in common. And we talked about this, I think, one of the very first podcasts you actually came on to. We discussed InfoWars and Alex Jones. And I think the overlap between the two of them is that Alex Jones started off quite libertarian-minded guy. And then, as you say, as the money starts to roll in, suddenly he starts to adopt politics which would almost seem to completely contradict the Alex Jones that existed 6 years ago. And I think it's similar with Farage, that once the success, the cash starts to flow in, any kind of true believer, I think, just left him. And I think that with Alex Jones, you can see when he went full Trump, full, kind of Russian agendaed, you can see how things crept in there that just didn't fit with the, albeit ridiculous, but nonetheless the character that we had come to know until that point. And I think Farage, to a degree, has had the same kind of effect. Even Tommy Robinson, you can see is night and day from the guy that existed, say, 5 or 6 years ago. You know, I'll get my hair done, I'll get my teeth all fixed and whitened up. He's getting the suits, he's getting everything you're saying, which is these guys are taken in and they're told how to perform. They're taught how to do this, and this Freeze articulated as well. RT is kind of the grooming ground. It's like the developmental territory, I guess, that they go to kind of get built up. And then by the time they hit the mainstream, these guys are quite polished now. And if you're not savvy, and I come back to what I said at the beginning, but if you're not the kind of person that questions people, if you just hear someone that talks confidently and goes, oh yeah, that must be right, if that's how your brain works, they will get you. Because the only thing that will stop them getting you is if you actually go, hang on, what the fuck did he just say? I'm going to go Google that. I'm going to check that. I'm going to make sure that's right. But if you're standing from a position of, I hate the government, fuck the establishment, I want everything to be simple, you are the mark. You are the person these guys are going to exploit to the hilt. All for the benefit of Russia. Because these guys, this is, for them, it's a career. It's showbiz. But beneath it, I think there is actually a political thing driving this, but at a way higher level. Like, Farage is a fucking nobody versus a Putin Kremlin level situation. I think that's the missing ingredient with all this. You've got these kind of showbiz pawn wannabes playing it on the middle level when actually there's a far bigger thing going on behind the scenes above, is my suspicion with it.
What's interesting to me is that ultimately Nigel Farage has been very, very successful in a media way, but he has not been very successful electorally. As we said, the only time his party has been successful is at EU elections, where there's a depressed turnout because the vast majority of people aren't actually voting. I mean, the turnout for the European elections can be as little as kind of 25%, can't it? Whereas their nut jobs are always going to go out and vote. They're a motivated voter in that capacity, and it's a proportional representation system. The only time they've had any representation in Westminster is when a Tory's fucking turned over. They've never won an election seat.
I think you got to put it in context. It's true that he's lost more elections from like anyone else on the planet. Like every time, it's just he gets humiliated, comes like fourth and stuff like that when he does a Westminster election. But to put that in context, it is first past the post. If he was doing that in a proportional system, probably they would do better. But also, you've got to remember that this has been like a fringe party. As you compare it to other fringe parties that have existed, like over that period of time, that have come and gone and have just like waxed and waned and disappeared. Look at all these like left-wing parties who were started off in a similar place in the 90s, and now you can't even name who they are. So
but he's no longer with UKIP. He's now the Brexit Party because he's abandoned UKIP because of their involvement with Tommy coming out of prison with a beard, Robinson, like he thinks he's fucking Nelson Mandela.
It's always easier to make people hate what you're against than it is to make them like you and what you stand for. That's an easy human psychology thing. If you go like, I hate child rapists, you're like, yeah, I agree with this guy. That's easy. But to actually go like, okay, well, who are you? Like, what are you creating? What are you generating? That's much, much harder. It's much harder to be a good person that gets cheered for ideas that they can come up with and create and things that they can offer. That's way more challenging. Yeah. The easy road is what Farage, Boris, all these idiots do, where they just sit, Rees-Mogg is exactly the same. No fucking ideas, no creativity. They just sit and point at the other thing and go, look how shit that thing is over there. And by doing that, people like them because of what they hate. That's why on elections he sucks, because he doesn't bring anything, he doesn't create anything, he doesn't stand for anything. But it's why as a persona, he's compelling.
I think the reason that he's always unsuccessful at Westminster seats is because he is a very motivating factor to people who disagree with him to actually get their arse out and vote. The thing to be aware of is that he is not only known in this country, he's now touring Australia, he's going over to America. He's threatened on 2 separate occasions with some periods of months in between to go and move to America. And I mean, every time he does it, everybody's like, we'll fucking drive you to the airport. We'll have a fucking competition for who gets to drive you to the airport. After he first said it, there was then the Mueller investigation started, and it was clear that he was implicated in whatever was going on, and he stopped going on about how he was going to move to America.
Reverse.
And now the Mueller investigation is over and it's been a bit of a damp squib. He's once again saying that he's going to go and move to America. Obviously, he was the first British politician that went over to meet Trump. That's the golden elevator photograph. everybody in that photograph is a scumbag. That's brilliant. So you've got to, it's just like, you've got Aaron Banks, you've got Kassem, the Breitbart London editor, who's also a kipper. You've got a couple of other hardcore scumbags. I mean, Aaron Banks is really, really interesting. He is supposedly the person that has donated more money than anybody else to the Leave EU campaign. But in terms of whether or not he really is rich enough to have donated that money, it's highly suspicious, because although he owns this big mansion house, it's mortgaged and he doesn't live in it. He hires it out for weddings and lives on a wee house in the grounds.
So what you're implying...
People are saying...
This would only...
I'm not saying, but people are saying that might be Russian money.
The rumour and innuendo would be that Aaron Banks is possibly facilitating funds coming from elsewhere into the Leave.
That is precisely so. The money...
Rumour and innuendo, totally unconfirmed.
It did get cleared recently.
Well, yeah, it was, but it was under an awful but lawful type thing, whereby he hadn't broken any law because nobody could prove where the money had come from. So he hasn't technically broken any law. That doesn't mean it's not fine.
You just were a very good criminal. You could look at that, you know.
The money came from a shell company in, I believe, the Isle of Man. And so there's no traceability. The Isle of Man, let us remember, somehow manages to not be part of the United Kingdom, but manages to have a currency union with it. It's funny that, isn't it? It's bizarre. It's got its own wee parliament and all the rest of it, and seems to manage perfectly fine. I wonder if there's any lessons to be learned from that. But yeah, so the money came in from a shell company in the Isle of Man, and there's no indication that that company does any trade. So where did the money come from? That's what people are saying, apparently. There was a whole load of money that went to the DUP that came via some guy that lives in a fucking council estate in Glasgow.
Well, the Tories, the Scottish Tories, rather, they had this thing as well, this dark money scandal that they were...
Richard Cook, I believe, is the guy's name.
It was ridiculous. They got fined something like 1,500 or less for this ridiculous level of money they'd actually received in donations through this dodgy... Well, they hadn't declared it, I think, was the problem. Yeah. That's a big question that I think as a country we have to answer. The when these things occur, that you cannot have a wee slap on the wrist type fine for something is gargantuanly wrong.
It needs to be substantially more than whatever the volume of money that came in. But yeah, so I believe some guy called, I think it's Richard Cook, and he lives in Scotland, and he's not a wealthy man, but somehow he managed to get £450,000 that went to the DUP for them to campaign for Brexit during the referendum campaign. This isn't conspiracy theory. These are the facts that happened.
Went through Northern Ireland because they realised that you don't need to disclose.
Yep, precisely so.
Who's funding you?
There was illegal activity, or there was very dubious activity. So, for instance, Darren Graham's organisation received money from the Leave EU campaign, donated to them so that they could spend it because, or money was directed to them, people are saying, so that they could spend money so that the campaign didn't exceed its election campaign limits. So, you know, they were fucking at it. They really were. And where was all this money coming from? Thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds. Our business spent about 30 quid on some Facebook adverts. We were hearing about it for about 2 months from people. Oh, I saw the thing on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook because I think it's poison. But I remember at the time being absolutely amazed by how little it had cost to have this massive reach that so many people commented on it to me.
Yeah, I've used it for the podcast, and Facebook is terrible. However, if you do want to follow us on Facebook, you can do so at facebook.com/AngryScotland. It's a couple of quid and you can reach thousands and thousands of people.
So I found myself thinking...
Because you can do it on a monthly thing. So I'm not plugging their service here, but you know, like you can set it for 30 to 60 days and it will take like a quid out of your bank like every day it's going, which, you know, that's like a can of juice work, you know, and you can reach thousands upon thousands of people by doing that.
Yeah.
You know, so to come back to what I said earlier on with the Hillary Clinton as the devil thing, that's all the Russians did. But I think what we're focusing here is the money to pay for said advertising, where the cash is coming from, I think is the more...
Yeah, I think that's...
I think there's definitely enough wealthy Brexiteers in the UK to have spent that money. So I'm not convinced, unless there's an actual smoking gun that I can see where there's like a trail that shows you it coming out of Vladimir Putin's bank account.
No, sure.
Struggling
You'll
to
never
actually-
find that because it will always have gone through shell companies.
Yeah.
I mean, there never will be when you know how shell companies are set up and things like that. You're never ever going to see that. You can only take your best guess. But I do think there was some dubious activity. But anyway, where you get to it being interesting is Cambridge Analytica. If you saw the undercover reporting that Channel 4 did, where they essentially got Alexander Nix bragging on hidden camera about what they'd been up to.
This is, again, not conspiracy theory, the Cambridge Analytica stuff.
Reported fact.
This is reported fact, yeah.
And Cambridge Analytica was working with another company called AIQ, which was essentially sort of them overseas. They've now put themselves into administration. The people involved have started up another company. They were DMing WikiLeaks, trying to get the John Podesta emails, for instance. For people who don't know, John Podesta was working with Hillary Clinton's campaign. He fell for the classic to change your Google password email. It's just like, oh, please, could everybody over 60 not be allowed to use the internet? To be fair to him, he thought it looked a bit sus. One of his staff emailed it to their IT guy saying, is this legit? And in the worst typo in history, guy emailed them back, meaning to say, this is not a legitimate email, but you should change your password. But instead said, this is a legitimate email and you should change your password. He hit the link and he fucking gave his password over and changed his password, and the Russians had full access. They not only got his emails, they got right into the Democrats' email server, and the John Podesta emails were then handed over to WikiLeaks.
This is going to be how the world ends. It's going to be some email gets sent with one slight typo in it that instigates a series of events that are utterly irrecoverable, and that's it. It's going to have a wee thumbs up emoji at the end of the sentence.
So it's the death of humanity by autocarrot. But Cambridge Analytica were messaging WikiLeaks to ask them if they wanted them to help archive documents that WikiLeaks had got, allegedly.
When we say WikiLeaks, that's really just Julian Assange.
Yeah,
I mean,
Peter Jukes, the journalist, has said the WikiLeaks main account had direct messaged him on Twitter asking him if he would give them some trove of information that he got. And he said, how do I get it to you? And they said, just drop it around the embassy. That's obviously Julian Assange. Subsequent to that, after the Ecuadorians got really sick of Julian Assange's shit and cut off his internet access, the WikiLeaks account contacted Peter Jukes again and asked Peter Jukes to give him something, and he said, well, how do I get it to you? And this time it was a big complicated Dropbox type scenario instead. So obviously you could no longer drop it round the embassy. This is where it becomes interesting between Nigel, to bring it back to dear old nicotine-stained man frog, Nigel Farage.
He looks like what would happen if Kermit the Frog actually shagged Miss Piggy.
A hollowed out frog of a man. Nigel Farage on I think March 9th, 2017 was caught going into the Ecuadorian embassy. He was just back from America. Trump's been in office a couple of months. He's just back from a trip to America. He goes into the Ecuadorian embassy and he's seen by just some guy on the street. The street's quiet. And this guy knows, you know, that it's the Ecuadorian embassy and sees Nigel Farage slipping in. So he tweets that he's just seen Nigel Farage going into the Ecuadorian embassy. And a BuzzFeed journalist happens to see that tweet.
A guy who was just hanging around the Ecuadorian embassy. Absolutely a spook.
That tweet gets seen by a BuzzFeed journalist. Maybe they just had Farage on a fucking keyword search on, TweetDeck or something. But BuzzFeed runs round to the embassy, and 40 minutes after he'd gone in, Farage comes out and is fucking caught by BuzzFeed journalists and is asked why he's there and says, I can't remember. 2 hours later, after Farage has come out, WikiLeaks reveals that they have a new cache of documents. I think it's the Vault 7, which is the Vault 7 cache of documents, which is all to do with CIA's hacking tips. This was right in the middle of Trump having a wee bit of a battle with his own security services. And this is classic Linton Crosby dead cat stuff. This appears to be, allegedly, Farage carrying stuff into the embassy for WikiLeaks from America. that is certainly what it looks like it could be. Let's understand that at this point, this is 2017, March 2017, Steve Bannon is still in the White House.
Yes, at that point, yes.
So Steve Bannon is still heavily involved with Breitbart and the Mercers. They're the people that basically now fund Breitbart. And Breitbart in London is run by one of the second-in-commands of UKIP, Qassam. So we've got a direct connection between Breitbart, Farage, and WikiLeaks.
What are you implying then? Are you suggesting that this speaks to Nigel Farage's criminality, rumour and innuendo-wise?
So,
his capacity for underhanded tactics, tying back to the Russia thing? Where does that...
I'm suggesting that he is a hypocrite and a liar when he presents himself as a patriot, because I think it is not in any way patriotic to be essentially doing the work of an adversarial country to your nation for personal gain. And I'm saying that when he talks about taking back control and wanting us to have strong laws that we set ourselves and all the rest of it, that none of those things are true if he is essentially willing to pass state secrets to a hostile agent like WikiLeaks. If those things are true, then I am suggesting that that would make him a hypocrite who does not really believe in the things that he says that he believes in. In much the same way that if you want strong rule of law, you would think he'd be pleased that the proroguing of our parliament was cancelled by our laws. But apparently he's perfectly fine with our democracy being cancelled if it gets his single objective.
Is this purely just any way the wind blows opportunism by fairly right-wing pricks, or is there somebody actually sat like in the Kremlin, hypothetically, going, we're orchestrating this?
No. So, you know my views on the kind of the small conspiracy of convenience. I'd never believe that there's any big organised person. If there was some person that could see 15 moves ahead of everybody else, like some omnipotent god, the world would not be the shambles that it is.
Is it as straightforward as a world with division and chaos is easier for a criminal to operate in?
That's it precisely.
If the law is upheld and we all work together as humans across the planet, we communicate and we're truthful and we're honest, that doesn't work for a guy like Farage. Because Farage, when it boiled down, is kind of thick, he's not very talented, he has no real skills, and the only way he's ever been able to get ahead is by lying and being an offensive dickhead. That's all he has to offer. And in an honest, good world, which we hopefully all want to work towards, this guy would not survive, because in a good world, this guy would never have been allowed to thrive and succeed. But because we live in the current version of the planet, this guy works. He's created a world that benefits him, that is based upon dishonesty, distrust, selling secrets, stabbing people in the back, putting up walls, creating borders. That fits his persona.
Yeah. And as much as there is anybody pulling strings, there is Putin pulling strings. But he's not pulling strings in some total fucking omnipotent mastermind way. All he does is throw seeds out in various ways. So you see all these sort of weird little scandals, like Maria Butina was this Russian gun rights activist who went over to America, infiltrated herself into the NRA, and she was just working as a Russian agent. How many more of these things are there where you pay one wage, you put one person in and you see how far they get? There'll be loads of them that haven't been successful, but some of them have been really successful. So WikiLeaks was really successful, and I firmly believe that WikiLeaks was a fucking Russian front from the beginning.
It's an extrapolation from what I was saying about the mind of the criminal, that if you look at it, the current Russian government, Putin is former KGB. A lot of people that were around him when he rose to power were former mafia guys.
Yeah, and this is very much a sort of mafia type situation. So when you look at how the mafia operates, you have one boss, but he's not actually in charge of overseeing all the criminal enterprises. He just takes his cut. You give him his tithe. And that's what's happening with Putin. There are people around Putin doing stuff. Probably ultimately Putin gets to say yes or no some of the time. But most of this will just be operatives doing stuff. And they're just trying to cause trouble, disruption, anywhere there's a secessionist movement, they're all over it. So the California secessionist movement is run by some guy that lives in fucking Siberia. You couldn't make this stuff up, but that is true.
It's why the Russians, I think, in 2014 were very into the idea of Scottish independence, because basically we were advocating for break up the UK, weaken the UK, and decommission Trident. And of course, if you're Putin, you're like, wee! Whereas now, because the movement, on the whole, at least the SNP side of things, the good bit of the SNP at least, is advocating for a pro-EU stance, that's strengthening a threat to Russia. And I think there is a chance that the division within the yes movement, as in there's like the normal bit with people that have brains and are reasonable and they're sane, and there's the other bit. I would suggest the other bit that are flying off into really fucking bring down Nicola Sturgeon, crazy conspiracy theory land, have some influence with the Russians.
I think you got to be careful not to retrospectively put a sort of plan in place that didn't actually exist in the first place. I think a lot of this is just objectives aligning.
Yeah.
That all these different groups are happening, all the things that are doing, WikiLeaks, Trump, Farage, Putin, just they want similar things, and obviously they're going to be pals because of that.
So what I think you can say, for instance, is I think after RT saw the uptick in ratings in the UK, probably particularly in Scotland, because they'd sort of taken our side of it in the independence referendum, they find themselves thinking, it very much looks like we might be going in towards Brexit. That's a thing we want. Let's get RT UK doors open. And I don't think that's a big leap to think that could be, it was October 2014, for fuck's sake. Do you know what I mean? They would have been planning the opening of that over the few months over that summer. So that's not a big leap to think to themselves that they're seeing the influence that they can have there and thinking that they can have a bit more and that they've already got a few people captured. I think that's probably fair.
One of the narratives that is coming out from elements within the Scottish independence movement is, well, the priority seems to now switch from Scottish independence to stopping Brexit. As if that's a bad thing. It's like, well, we could stop Brexit and have Scottish independence. So we want to like intentionally fuck someone else over to get what we want. And that sounds quite dodgy as a premise to me.
We really, really need, ideally, England to remain in the EU as well, because otherwise we're going to have exactly the same fucking problems that Northern Ireland is currently about to have with ERA, which is we'll have a hard border between us and the EU.
Yeah, so like the priority,
that's a fucking nightmare.
The way Nicola is handling this is exactly what I would do in this very fucking scenario. And okay, politically this highlights the fucking differences of why Scotland ideally should be independent, so doesn't get roped into this mess to begin with. However, now that we are all in the mess, the preference is to fucking stop the mess. Yep. And then we can come out at the other side.
I mean,
whereas the drive seems to be from these elements, it's very much like, oh no, but we really want Brexit to happen. And then that's when we'll get independence. Brexit happening seems to be something these people are like, whatever. And that feels very illogical and daft to me, to the point where I'm thinking that feels like something you'd have to be told to say, as opposed to something that you would rationally step to, if that makes sense.
People do just pick up talking points from TV. James O'Brien's genius is always just asking people why. People don't know why, they've just picked up the thing.
Let's focus on Nigel. So Nigel's world is a world built on deceit and crime. That's what he wants, because Nigel as a person can't cut it in fair and just society. So he creates one that's not fair and just. Is that what we're concluding? And the bigger question I'd have after that would be, what is the appeal?
People like eccentrics, especially English people. They like their eccentric politicians.
Yeah,
there was an incident I remember from, I think it was 2012, around about that kind of time, where there was a whole bunch of like kind of people I was following on Twitter, younger people, kind of libertarian people who'd got quite into the UKIP kind of thing. One of them actually was elected as like the youth leader of the UKIP. Amazing there was any. I don't know why they were thought it was going to be all right. I was very skeptical, obviously. I was like, this is ridiculous. But anyway, this guy was elected. A couple of days later, he was sent to go on some radio show and talk about his new role. And he talked about how he was, pro same-sex marriage, and he wanted to legalise drugs and all this kind of libertarian stuff. Legalise prostitution, and he'd spoken to Nigel Farage, and he'd said, I'm very libertarian, and the party actually in his manifesto said we're a libertarian party. So he was kind of assured by Nigel that this kind of stuff was okay. It was maybe not ever going to be official policy, but the youth were allowed to have these slightly different views. Within a day of that, having been in this show and spoken about these things, he was sacked because obviously the old guard caught wind of it and were like, you got to get rid of this guy because our old gammon
in a
are never going to stand for
splattered over the walls.
Same-sex marriage or anything like that.
It's like, we are a libertarian party. Do what you want as long as we agree with it.
Yeah.
But it was quite interesting for me at that point. I kind of knew then got a handle on Farage as this guy who has this kind of Zelig character. He'll tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And be very eloquent about it to get you on board, but, then turn on you if he has to.
My ultimately core principle is that I don't give a fuck what anybody else wants to do as long as they're not bothering other people. Pretty much everything maps onto that.
That's our manifesto. Please vote.
I just don't care as long as you're not hurting other people. That's it at its core. So I guess that's kind of libertarian.
So this is where Nigel Farage, I think, had that initial anti-establishment libertarian thing, because that is something that I think does appeal to humans.
But you see, the thing that he wants to ask for, this abolishment of the EU, all this stuff about red tape, we want to get rid of EU red tape. Well, actually, what's actually happening is that there's going to be a lot more red tape for all of our interactions with the EU.
Yeah, it's just the irony. Britain is the most bureaucratic country in the entire planet. The idea that leaving the EU would make less red tape is just a complete farce.
This is where, as a species, I would argue at our core, a lot of us walk around with the mentality that Tucker just articulated, which is just do what you want, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, it's fine. Which is a very libertarian concept. However, what I think we're finding out as a species, though, in order to achieve that, we have to regulate. This is almost like my awakening point with politics. Because I came in from burn it down, take down the establishment, end all government. But then you stop and you think, but how would that actually work? Freeze in this ridiculous contradictory state where the concept of the European Union and all the government that goes with it is probably quite to him. But Free loves freedom of movement. He wants that. And the only way that's going to work is if we have all that bit. And this is where you make the step up to understanding that in order to have these freedoms that we have to have the government bit, which I don't think a lot of Tories get that. I think, or at least the Brexity far-right, alt-right, they haven't realised that the freedoms that they have are a result of legislation and government.
The extent of the ignorance of people who are Tory MPs is amazing. Andrew Bridgen thought that he was entitled to an Irish passport because he was English.
Yeah.
Dominic Raab didn't seem to have a grasp of how Dover-Calais worked. Yeah, they actually didn't understand the thing that they were against. And now they've gone so far down that line, they're all having to fucking pretend that what they really, really want is a hard Brexit, which was never the thing that was being promised.
I think there is something in what he'd seen in UKIP from when it started, just being an absolute mess, just a complete disaster, and him knowing that he could make it into something that could be successful. It's basically herding cats. It's like, you can't imagine how difficult a job it would have been to actually get UKIP into a place where it was, they had at least a handful of people who could go on telly and actually string two sentences together. I mean, when you look at the kind of nutters that have been involved in that party over the times, like Lord Mugton and
Godfrey Bloom,
oh man.
So you don't clean behind.
What was their own guy? Coburn.
Oh my God, David Coburn.
But through all of that, Farage has managed to hold this package of morons together. So credit to him. And I think that's part of the thing for him, has been that he's been able to do that, and it's been like a source of pride for him that he's managed to hold together this shambles. There have been a couple of occasions where Farage is, at least twice, maybe even 3 times, where he's like given up being the leader. He's like, oh, I'm tracking this in. You know, he's like stood for election and then failed and handed in his notice, and then they've not accepted it and said, oh no, you need to stay on, Nigel, you're so good for us, we need you and all this. Within 5 minutes of him leaving the party, they got in Tommy Robinson, and he actually left the party at that point and started.
Who was the lad they got in that was that the fucking YouTube dork that was advocating for rape?
Sargon.
Yeah, Sargon. Fucking idiot. Yeah, they got him in. They got our Scotland's own Count Dankula, who's also terrible. The whole thing just went to shit. I think
there's 2 ways.
Well, here's my theory on that. Right, I have had a theory on this. That my take on that UKIP thing was that it was a work, because I believe what happened was that they knew the Brexit Party was going to be a thing, right, to make a statement at the elections. So my theory was that Nigel intentionally nuked UKIP because it made the Brexit Party seem more moderate. That I genuinely believe this is actually what happened. That they went, right, to make the Brexit Party seem more middle of the road, more normal, we have to make UKIP really look like a fucking clown car. So let's get all these idiots from YouTube, all the fucking info warriors we can find, get Paul Joseph Watson in here, the whole fucking 9 yards, and make it look like an utter fucking bin fire.
And that's why we should support the Wings Party.
That's where we can put them all.
Yes. But you could see, though, the logic of it, because right now, a lot of those people are hovering around in the SNP, and there are a lot of people in the SNP who are like, holy shit, why, how the fuck are they in here? The minute they go to the Wings Party, the SNP are going to look like the most lovely, cuddly, most middle-of-the-road, responsible people you'll ever met. Which, at the moment, you really can't see, because there's a lot of people in the SNP that are fucking nuts. So the Brexit Party, it was what it was, but I think that what made it seem more acceptable to your middle-class English voter was the fact that, well, it's not like UKIP. I mean, fuck me. I mean, they're really bad. That whole thing was a work to get votes, okay. I think.
The counter-argument, just to play devil's advocate, is Anne Widdecombe.
Fucking Anne Widdecombe, I hadn't thought of that. Another one the BBC can't stop giving airtime to. She was in Strictly Come Dancing. So here's someone who believes in gay conversion therapy. We'll put them on the dancing show. That happened. That fucking happened. What the fuck?
There's kind of 2 ways you can take Farage's control of UKIP over that period of time. You can say, well, at least he was there and it wasn't someone much worse, like some really BNP guy. Or you can think, actually, he was the really racist, terrible guy, but he managed to make it look as if he's not, which is worse.
Yes, I think Nigel Farage is just a disruptive force and enjoys being a disruptive force. That's how he gets his kicks. If he had just wanted power, he would have become a Conservative MP, and he can talk, even though he's a bit dim, but he can talk. You're absolutely right. He would have done very well with the Tories. He could have been a minister. He could easily have been a leader of the Conservative Party. That was all possible for him. That's not the route he chose. Nigel Farage is Boaty McBoatface. He likes causing trouble.
So stop buying into it. Everybody, stop buying into this. There's lots of Nigel Farages out there, and just stop. Yes, the guy can talk. He can move his hands in a way which makes you think, oh man, he's got sincerity. He doesn't. The whole thing is a work. It's a lie. He's exploiting you. He's making money off of you. The guy has no idea what a real day's work is actually like. He's got more privilege than most of you can even fathom. Fuck these people and just see it early on, and don't give them platforms. Don't say a public service broadcaster. That's what we do. We're public interests. Don't platform these people. Stop putting them on YouTube. Stop putting them on social media. Stop retweeting them. Stop interacting with them. Just let them go away. And hopefully curl up and fucking die. Because that's what has to happen. And hopefully we won't have this happen again in the future.